Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Political Hitman. I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman, here on Israel News Talk Radio. You could join me in the chat room on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, where the conversation is always happening, and it's always fun to be in the chat room on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. This is a live show. This Political Hitman is a live show, and you could call in North America. The number is 301-768-4841. In Israel, the number is 0265000151. I've been off for a few weeks. I'm happy to be back. I'm glad that you guys waited for me, and I'm very happy to be back. And I appreciate that that Tamar and the team at Israel News Talk Radio agreed to have me come back on the air. Not like they threw me off the air, but you know, I'm always grateful that when they allow me the airtime here on Israel News Talk Radio. I've been watching the news, and I don't know about you, but I was not surprised about what happened in Afghanistan. Everybody seems to be surprised. I was not surprised at all, because I've seen this movie before. I've seen this story before, and I know how it's going to end. And that is the problem. The problem is that we can continuously see the same story play over and over and over again. And we don't learn from the mistakes of the past. And because we don't learn from the mistakes of the past, people end up dead. People end up oppressed. People end up tortured. People end up sold into sex slavery. And it's outrageous. And it's outrageous that an American government that claims to be for human rights and claims to be for saving people and for bringing democracy to the world has destroyed a country and still allows and pulls its soldiers out and allows a terroristic, oppressive government to take over. It's outrageous. It's mind-blowing, really. But it's not the first time we've seen this. In fact, we've seen this pretty close to home. I'm Howie Silberger's Political Hitman. Join me in the chat room, IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Call in 301-768-4841. In Israel, 0265000151.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Josh Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
Political Hitman. I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman, here on Israel News Talk Radio. Feel free to join me in the chat room at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. You could call in. The show is live. Feel free to call in. The numbers to call in North America, 301-768-4841. In Israel, 0265-00151. So, in the last couple of days, we've seen the Americans pull out of Afghanistan. Now, Donald Trump, at the beginning of his tenure as president, declared that he was going to pull all troops out of Afghanistan before the end of his term. He didn't pull all troops out, and it fell onto the shoulders of Joe Biden, who did pull the troops out in a disastrous way and blamed it on Donald Trump. Now Biden is trusting the terrorists to help evacuate thousands of Americans that got stranded there when the military just took off. And if you saw that video of the military taking off, if you watched that video of that C-17 fly away, and the people grabbing onto the landing gear and then falling off to their deaths, It was horrifying, really horrifying. And it is another embarrassing moment in the history of American military, another embarrassing moment in the Joe Biden presidency. But it didn't surprise me. And I tell you, I wasn't surprised at all on how this ended. 20 years in Afghanistan and leaving in disgrace, not surprising. Well, the reason it's not surprising is because I've seen the story before. We've experienced this before. Maybe not with America, but we've experienced it with Israel. I don't know how many of you listening remember the embarrassing withdrawal of Israel from Gaza. I remember it clearly, and I'm not sure how many people listening remember it. But that was, I would say, in my opinion, I would say that was one of the most embarrassing decisions made by an Israeli government in the history of the state of Israel. And remembering that, and remembering the pain and suffering the people of Israel, the people of Gaza, the people who lived in Gush Katif, the pain and suffering they went through as they were yanked from their homes, as their loved ones were unburied and relocated into Israel, as their homes were knocked down, and as their synagogues, which they decided not to knock down because holy buildings, you shouldn't be bulldozing holy buildings, and their synagogues were turned into launching pads for terrorists to attack them. The pain and suffering that they experienced should have taught the world that negotiating with terrorists, that capitulating to terrorists, that giving up land and bowing to terrorists only results in more terrorism. It only makes sense. I mean, think about it for a second. It makes sense that if you give the terrorists power, the terrorists are going to grab that power, they're going to seize the power, and they're going to use the power. No terrorist is going to get the power and say, hey, all right, thank you. Thank you for giving me the power. Thank you for walking away, leaving me hundreds of thousands of guns, military helicopters and trucks and tanks and everything else. Thank you so much for all this military gear and for giving me the power and the control over a country. We're just going to forget our ideology and we're just going to live peacefully with everybody. What moron in their right mind would ever dream that would happen? So, the two questions have to be asked. And these two questions are important questions. They have to be asked. Question number one that we should be asking is, was there any reason for America to go into Afghanistan to start with? That's question number one. Why were they there? They claimed that they went to Afghanistan because that's where allegedly Osama bin Laden was hiding. That's where their intelligence thought that Osama bin Laden was hiding. It's not necessary. It wasn't true. He wasn't in Afghanistan. He was in India or in Pakistan. But they thought he was in Afghanistan. Once they realized he wasn't in Afghanistan, why'd they stay? So, one could argue that they stayed because they wanted to rid Afghanistan of the Taliban. That is one reason they could claim that they stayed. But if that was true, why did they not wipe out the Taliban? They were there for 20 years. Because historically, and let's be honest, historically, nobody's ever, no regime, no empire has ever conquered Afghanistan. The Romans tried, they failed. The French tried, they failed. The Russians tried, they failed. The Americans tried, they failed. Nobody's conquered Afghanistan. The people living in Afghanistan, they live in mountainous region. It's a mountainous region. And living in a mountainous region, they know how to hide from their enemies. They know how to protect themselves. They know how to defend themselves. So nobody's ever conquered Afghanistan. So if it was a losing war, and America should have seen it was a losing war, and they should have known it was a losing war before they even went in, based on what happened with Russia just 40 years before, 30 years before they attacked Afghanistan. One would think that American military intelligence, and I know I'm giving a lot of credit to military and intelligence, it's an oxymoron. I know those two words are oxymoronic. American military intelligence should have known that perhaps, just perhaps, there was an issue. Perhaps they should have known that they couldn't win the war, that it was a winless war, and maybe they should have invested as much money and as much troops and as much lives into Afghanistan. But going back to not learning from history, when we see people pulling out from various lands and giving land away to people who have vowed to destroy them. It always infuriates me. I get infuriated by it. I don't get upset. I get infuriated. It makes me angry. And the reason it gets me angry is because I've always lived by the philosophy that if my enemy tells me they want to kill me, I believe them. I have no reason in the world to doubt my enemy when my enemy says, I want to kill you. When the Iranians get up and say, let's destroy Israel and destroy the Zionist entity and destroy America, I believe them. I believe that is exactly what they want to do. I can't imagine anybody's going to get up and say, I want to kill you, I want to destroy you, I want to wipe you off the face of the earth and not mean it. And the reason I can't imagine that people just say these things and don't mean it is because historically, people who have said these things have carried through with their threat. When Hitler got up and wrote the Mein Kampf, way before World War II, he outlined in his book exactly what he wanted to do. He outlined exactly his hatred towards the Jewish people, his hatred towards gypsies, his hatred towards blacks, his hatred towards gays, his hatred towards anything that wasn't German and Aryan. He outlined it clearly, and he clearly stated in his book that these people were lower class, they were a lower form of humanity, and they had to be destroyed. So when he took power and started implementing the plan that he had laid out in his book, why was anybody surprised? And we could keep going on. We could keep going with this. When Israel pulled out of Gaza and Hamas took over Gaza, which happened. I mean, it didn't happen immediately, but the process was there, and Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority could have predicted that there would have been a civil war and that perhaps the Palestinian Authority wouldn't have won the civil war. I know they tried to win it with America's backing, but they didn't really win it. But when Israel pulled out and Hamas took over, do you not think that the Israeli military intelligence knew that Hamas was going to start lobbing missiles or attacking Israel in some way or another? Of course they knew. Yet it's still going on. It's 18 years later and it's still happening. Why is it still happening? Because governments are afraid to take care of the terrorist entities. There is some kind of an innate fear for governments to wipe out people who want to destroy them. And this is a newfound fear. This is not something that's passed down from generation to generation. In the past, and if you read historical records from the past, including the Bibles, you'll see that a group of people rise up and say, we want to destroy another group of people. They get into a war. One group totally wipes out the other group, and then the threat is neutralized. By allowing the other group to remain, you're basically creating a perpetual war. You're creating something that's going to continue from generation to generation. One generation is going to teach the next generation to hate the people that they hate. And then you end up in, excuse the I hate this analogy, but you end up in a Hatfield and McCoy situation where two families could fight for 200 years. 200 years later, they have no idea why they're fighting, but they're still fighting. The meaning of the fight has been lost over 200 years, but they're still fighting. The only way to resolve a situation is to wipe out the terrorists, to wipe out the people who want to destroy you. So Israel failed to wipe out Hamas, who has vowed to destroy them, and America failed to wipe out the Taliban. So Hamas is running a jihadi state in Gaza under Sharia law, and now the Taliban are going to be doing that in Afghanistan again. People are going to be oppressed again. And both times, both of these things, by the way, the removal of the Israeli troops from Gaza and the removal of American troops from Afghanistan, both could probably be traced back. If you want to really take a look technically at what happened, you could probably trace them both back to American governmental pressure. Well, the governmental decision in Afghanistan and pressure on the Israeli government to do this in Gaza. So if we've seen this movie before, and we understand that this is the same game, how do we react? How should we react? I want to hear from you. Give me a call. In North America, 301-768-4841. In Israel, 0265-00151. You could join me in the chat room at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, I'm Steve Miller.
And I'm Matt Zucker.
Join us for Lighten Up, where we take a look at the week's current events in Israel and from around the Jewish world through a humorous lens.
If you've been paying attention during these crazy times, you know that it's a challenge to parody life anymore. But join Steve and I as we give it the old college try. Not only is being happy an obligation, but life is just too short to take it all so seriously.
So join me, Steve Miller.
And me, Matt Zucker.
For Lighten Up every Monday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. Israel, only on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
Political Hitman.
I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman here on Israel News Talk Radio. Feel free to join in on the conversation. You can give me a call, 301-768-4841. In Israel, you can call 0265-00151. You could join me in the chat room at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, where the talk is always interesting and the chat is always exciting. So America pulled out of Afghanistan, giving the country to the Taliban. And 20 years ago, when America went into Afghanistan as a reaction to a group of Saudi Arabian terrorists jumping onto airplanes and flying them into the World Trade Center, so as reaction to that, as retaliation for that, America attacked Afghanistan. When they jumped into Afghanistan, the Taliban founder, one of the founders of the Taliban, Mullah Baradar, ran. He took off and he went to hide in another Arab country, and he just returned to Afghanistan for the first time in 20 years. Now, on a recent television interview, the Taliban said that they were going to try to be a good government. They were going to be a fair government. They were going to allow women rights, and they were going to allow people to live their lives in freedom and peace. And then the terrorist leader, Mullah Baradar, returned to Afghanistan. I don't know. I don't know. The media sickens me too. We've talked about this before. The media sickens me too because look, let's be honest. Joe Biden messed up. This whole thing was a mess up. It was a complete and utter disaster. It was an embarrassment to the United States of America. Now, because the media hates Donald Trump, and Donald Trump announced that he's going to run for re-election the next presidential election, the media has to build up Joe Biden. They don't want Donald Trump. They hated him. So they have to build up Joe Biden. Now, when Joe Biden messes up on the world stage, as he did with this withdrawal from Afghanistan, this in normal times, and this is not normal times. This is not the way normal politics works. In normal times, if somebody messed up like this, they would be impeached, or they would be pressured to resign. That is normal times. Today, the media is going to cover up the misfortune of the Afghanistani people, the fact that America abandoned them, the fact that the U.S. is depending on a terror group that's running the country to go and gather up Americans and give them a safe exit. It's quite odd. It's quite odd when a country that is defeated in a war now asks the country that defeated them ask the people that defeated them to allow their political prisoners or allow their citizens to leave the country safely. Do you think the Taliban is going to allow Americans to leave safely? Do you think they're just going to gather them up and throw them out of the country? They have America by the short hairs now. And having America by the short hairs means that they are in control. And them being in control means that they run the show. They're the boss. America hasn't learned yet, after all the fighting in the Middle East, after all their involvement in the Middle East over the years, after all the negotiations, after all the communications they've had with leaders in the Middle East, they haven't learned the cardinal rule of the Middle East. The rule that everybody who negotiates in the Middle East should know and understand, they haven't learned it. And that rule is, quite simply, might means right. If you show that you're weak in the Middle East, you are dead. Which is why Saddam Hussein pretended to have weapons of mass destruction. He didn't want to die. He didn't want his country taken over. So if he told everybody he had weapons of mass destruction, even if he didn't have, and we know he didn't have, but if he told his people and he told the rest of the world that he had weapons of mass destruction, then Saddam Hussein had power. And having power is what matters in the Middle East. Nothing else matters. The illusion of power matters. If you could scare people into believing that you have the power, then you are the king. America gave up. They withdrew. They capitulated. They quit. They showed their weakness. America has no power in the Middle East anymore. Now, is this good for Israel? Of course it is not good for Israel. Because the Middle East is not a independent, these countries aren't independent zones. Everybody is watching, the whole world. And when Arab leaders see that America is weak, American allies are weak. You can't use America you can't use the excuse that America's backing me in order to protect yourself anymore. Now, I'm not worried about Israel. Israel has a very competent army and somewhat competent, maybe a little bit competent government. I'm not too worried about Israel's survival. Israel could defend herself. But Israel can't rely on leaning on America's shoulder anymore. Because if America could abandon the people of Afghanistan, the people they promised that they would support, the people they promised that they would help, the people they promised that they would create a livable country in, the people they promised that they would get rid of the Taliban in, if America could betray those people the way that they betrayed those people by just getting up and leaving, doing a midnight move, then how could anybody else trust America? So many years, so many decades of building trust and building trusting relationships with people in the Middle East just came crashing down with a video of a C-31 flying off. It is absolutely a disastrous move for America, and we are going to see the results, the ripple effect of this move, with more terrorism and more bold terrorism, because now the Taliban is running Afghanistan, and if the Taliban can run Afghanistan, then the PLO and Hamas are emboldened, and they're emboldened because now they're going to believe, and almost rightly so, that armed resistance, as they call it, terrorism against innocent civilians, and fighting the man will reap results. It could take years, it could take decades, but will reap results. And so they will continue fighting, and they will step up their efforts to destroy Israel. They will step up their efforts to get rid of American or Western influence in the Middle East. They will step up their efforts to to continue to kill innocent men, women, and children. And emboldened, and they will be emboldened. And I would almost say rightly so by the events of Afghanistan. And that is truly, that is more than anything else. That is the scariest part of the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. I really believe that America showing their weakness like this will result in an increase in terrorism, will result in more death, destruction, and hurting of innocent people. And that is a shame. It is horrible. It is horrific. And the Biden administration should be held accountable for that. So if terrorism increases in countries like Israel and other countries in Europe and in the Middle East, if the Taliban and if ISIS suddenly resurfaces and decides that they are going to try to create their caliphate, as the Taliban created a caliphate in Afghanistan, and they're going to create their caliphate across the Middle East, and they start killing people again, it falls solely on the shoulders of the American government. And it pains me to say this because I love the United States of America. I really love the country. And it pains me to point the finger at them and say, hey, you messed up, and now you're going to get people killed. They messed up when they killed Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, which created ISIS. And they messed up today. Now, I've seen a lot of videos of the comparison between the American withdrawal from Vietnam and the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. And, you know, when you look at the pictures side by side of the American plane or helicopter landing on the roof of the embassy to take embassy officials away, they're almost identical. And that was the most amazing, that was the most striking thing of showing the two pictures side by side, is that the imagery is almost identical. But is there a way to get out of this? Is there a way for the world to be able to kind of twist this around and make this a better thing and make this work, at least for the world? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that there's a fix for this. I don't know. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman. Call in North America, 301-768-4841. In Israel, 02-6500-151. You could join me in the chat room at israelnewstalkradio.com, where the chat is always interesting and the conversation is always stimulating. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you tired of political correctness and the fear that you might offend someone?
I'm not afraid to offend you.
Wow, look who's talking tough.
One has to be tough to keep sane today.
Hi, I'm Alan Skorsky.
And I'm Bela Seabrow.
And join us every Wednesday for The Definitive Wrap as we interview the most sought-after guests and expose progressive trends that masquerade as enlightenment but actually destroy our freedoms.
We are the No Woke Zone, so buckle up to this exciting show.
Buckling up, but I'm driving.
Sure, you can drive, but I'm the navigator.
Tune in for the No Nonsense, The Definitive Wrap Show, every Wednesday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Political Hitman. I'm Howie Silberger, your political hitman, here on Israel News Talk Radio. Feel free to join me in the conversation. You can join in on the conversation by calling in at 301-768-4841. In Israel, you could dial 02-6500-151. You can join me in the chat room at israelnewstalkradio.com. And I'd love to hear from you. I'm sure you have an opinion on this. So America pulled out of Afghanistan, abandoned the Afghani people, We saw them running after the planes, trying to cling onto them, trying to get out of Afghanistan anyway, so they don't have to live under the tyrannic rule of the Taliban. Some of them managed to get onto the plane. Others grabbed onto the landing gear and ended up dead. They found a dead body in the landing gear of one of the planes that took off from there. It is extremely sad and horrific that this happened. Right now, the Taliban are the second, besides America. Taliban have the most amount of Black Hawk aircrafts, helicopters in the world that America abandoned in Afghanistan. Plus, they have tanks and hundreds of thousands of weapons that America did not take with them when they abandoned Afghanistan. So they left this terror group. They left them tanks. They left them Humvees. They left them Black Hawk aircraft, helicopters. They left planes on the tarmac. America didn't take all their military equipment with them because the withdrawal was done. The withdrawal wasn't done voluntarily, of course. The Taliban were taking over Kabul, and America had to get out. And that's the problem. The problem is that America didn't leave on their terms; they left on the Taliban's terms. And by leaving on the Taliban's terms meant that that they were stuck. They had no choice in the matter, and they just had to run with the shirts on their backs. And that's no way a country should leave a war that they've been fighting and winning for the last 20 years. So the question is, and this question was brought up to me just recently. The question is, why didn't America blow up the army bases before they left? They could have easily bombed their own army bases, blown up their equipment, destroyed the guns. They could have easily blown up the helicopters as they took off. Why didn't they do that? What is the ulterior motive of leaving all this weaponry to the Taliban? It almost makes me think. It really. I hate making this comparison, but it is such a great comparison because it actually makes sense. When Israel signed the Oslo Accords, they created these zones where the Palestinian Authority was running certain zones and Israel was running certain zones, and there was a zone here and a zone there and a zone there, and the Palestinian Authority were allowed at the time to I think they still have them. They were allowed to create a police force. And Israel was obligated to give the Palestinian Authority guns for the police force and train the people on how to use the guns. Train the officers of the police force on how to use guns. And so Israel supplied M16s and other guns to the Palestinian Authority police force that were supposed to be patrolling their areas. So what did this police force do with these guns? What do you think they did with these guns? They turned them on their Israeli counterparts and started shooting at them. Because they were a terrorist organization whose main goal is the destruction of the state of Israel. So here you have the people who are targeted, the people who they want to destroy, who the enemy wants to destroy, giving the guns to and the weaponry to the people who want to destroy them. It didn't work with the Palestinian Authority, and after a lot of negotiation, a lot of fighting, a lot of people dying, they finally came to some kind of an agreement. But even that agreement has never been followed through, and many of the murders that happened in Israel following the Oslo Accords and for years after happened using Israeli equipment that was given to the Palestinian Authority. So bad idea number one in any conflict situation is giving the enemy weapons. If I'm in a fight with you and it's a violent fight and you say you want to kill me, me giving you a gun would probably end that fight fairly quickly. It seems ridiculous to have to verbalize this. It seems kind of stupid to have to say this. But if you think about it and you consider the rationale behind it, it doesn't make much sense that you would give guns, you would give weaponry to a group of people who have vowed to destroy you. Why would you do that? Are you suicidal? Is this some kind of a suicide pact? I'm not so sure why somebody would do that. America leaving their weaponry and not destroying it. America just taking off and leaving everything there has armed the Taliban to the teeth. So any chance of somebody else coming in and cleaning up America's mess, any chance of the poor people of Afghanistan ridding themselves in a popular uprising or anything else of the Taliban rule, any chance of ridding the Middle East of the Taliban has just been extremely diminished, if not made extinct, by America leaving this weaponry. Now, somebody argued with me, hey, they don't have the keys to the helicopters, and America could remotely disarm them. Okay, if that's the case, that's the case. That's fine. That's fine. But giving the illusion that the Taliban has this equipment, giving the illusion that they have the right to use the equipment, giving that illusion has given the Taliban more strength than actually having the equipment and actually being able to use it. And that is where the problem lies. Saddam Hussein, for years, said that he had a nuclear program. I don't know if you remember, they had this little German guy running around Iraq for years, trying to, after the first Gulf War, trying to find these weapons of mass destruction Saddam Hussein had. And Saddam Hussein, he let him inspect everything because he never really had these weapons, but he just claimed to have these weapons because it was a power play. Syria claimed to have nuclear weapons. They didn't really have nuclear weapons. They had the beginnings of a nuclear power plant that Israel destroyed, or somebody destroyed, that mysteriously blew up in the desert. But they claimed to have it. Why did they claim to have it? Because Assad wanted an advantage. If Iraq had nuclear weapons, then Iraq could fire those nuclear weapons onto Syria. So now Syria had to have nuclear weapons. And therefore, Syria claimed to have a nuclear weapon stockpile. And so it goes. One country after another, in order to protect themselves from another country that's lying about having the weaponry, lies about having the weaponry. And that's the Middle East. Might makes right. If I'm strong, if you hit me, if I hit you back twice as hard, you're not going to hit me again. And that is the lesson of the Middle East that nobody seems to remember. That is the lesson of the Middle East that nobody seems to learn. And that is problematic when you don't learn the lessons of history. And this is why we teach history. And I know, I was sitting in a meeting this week, and somebody who was an educator and high up in the hierarchy of education looked at me and said, this teacher has to teach history. Oh, I feel so bad for somebody who has to teach history. It's such a boring subject. And I looked at the person incredulously. I've taught history for years. I love teaching history. I love teaching history in high school. I love teaching history to people. I love talking about history. Because if we understand history, we understand what's happening today. Nothing is new. Nothing is original. It is a pattern. And the patterns, you have to recognize the patterns. And the only way to recognize the patterns of what's happening is to remember when it happened before. And then you can predict the results of what's going to happen. So the quagmire of Afghanistan, we could take a look at the situation with the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, and we could understand that in Afghanistan, after the Americans took off, either they are going to terrorize a country that's close to them, or they're going to terrorize their people. They're going to create a caliphate there, and they're going to impose Sharia law on their people, and they're going to enforce it. We know that's going to happen because it happened in Gaza. So if you look at history and you see what happened historically, then you can understand what's going to happen in the future. So when someone tells me that history is boring, and who wants to study history, who cares what happened in the past? I do. I care what happened in the past. I care that every single time somebody said, I want to kill you to another country, and they actually went out and tried to kill them. Every time somebody told my people, you're Jewish, and because you're Jewish, we're going to kill you because you deny the truth of the Christian Bible. We're going to come and kill you unless you convert. I believe them. Every time an Arab leader, anytime any leader gets up and says, we want to destroy the state of Israel, we want to kill all Jews that live there, I believe them. I believe every single word they say. I don't doubt them for 1 second. Nobody should doubt them not even for a second. If your enemy says he wants to kill you, take it to the bank. Your enemy wants to kill you. And if you're in denial and you're saying that's not what he meant, and I hear that a lot, that's not what he meant. Let's analyze every syllable and see what he actually meant. No, that's actually what he meant. If the enemy came and said, I want to kill you, that's what the enemy actually meant. The enemy wasn't lying to you. The enemy wasn't telling you, I want to kill you, and then he was bring you a bouquet of flowers or a bottle of wine. That's not happening. The enemy tells you, I want to kill you. The enemy is trying to find your weakness so they can come and kill you. And showing your weakness, showing your backside, raising your tail, that is a surefire way for the enemy to come and kill you. So we see that this is a major problem that really doesn't have an ending. This will be an ongoing war between Afghanistan and everything Western. And it is a bloody shame that America pulled out. I'm Howie Silberger. This is Political Hitman. Thank you for joining me. I will see you again next week, right here on Israel News Talk Radio.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling for the rolling hills of Malaya Dumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Malaya Dumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.